Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio with your hosts, Irene and Mark and Mark Johnson.
Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio, the flagship show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Irene Allen Block, and here again with me tonight is my co-host, Mark Johnson.
Hello.
Hello, Mark. Now, Mark, you're going to tell us about this busy weekend you've had?
The busy weekend I had. Well, let's see. I went down to the San Luis Valley this weekend. They were having a conference at the UFO Watchtower, and they had several speakers there, and then at night they were doing UFO watching, sky watching. So camped out for the weekend, had a lot of fun, met some people from the Sacred Hoop Ministry that I know, and hung out with them. We had a really great time. And some of the speakers were really good. In fact, a couple might be appearing on this show here in the next few weeks.
Well, that's going to be good.
And I did have a couple of strange experiences. Not seeing UFOs.
But you with strange experiences. Now, that's a new one, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you know what? I don't know. This was so out of the norm for me that I'm not sure what it was or how to take it. But I'll tell this very briefly because I don't want to take away from our guest. But twice in one night, on Saturday night, we were sitting out sky watching, and there were a lot of clouds in the sky. It had rained earlier, so some stars were coming through. There were some clouds. We were trying to meditate and look up at the sky, and I just happened to focus on this one darker patch in the sky. And then all of a sudden, overlaid with the cloud, it wasn't the clouds making an image like pareidolia. There was an overlaid image of an alien face on the cloud. And what struck me was how crystal clear it was, the outline of this thing with the big black eyes and the bulbous head. It was a typical gray alien face. It lasted for about 2 whole seconds. I mean, I can count 1001, 1002 before it disappeared. But I clearly saw it. And what made me realize it wasn't my imagination, was just how defined and clear the edges were. Weird. Really, really weird.
Mm-hmm. That is strange. Very strange.
And then a couple hours later, about midnight, I was sitting out by myself. Everybody else had gone to bed and I wasn't ready. And I'm sitting there trying some different things. And at one point, I just happened to look to my left at the campsite right next to me because I was looking around at the skies. And all of a sudden, there was this bright streak of light. Now, it hit me for a second. It wasn't in the sky. It was 25 feet away from me, just off the ground. It's like somebody took a big bright flashlight and just went whoosh in an arcing circle from top to bottom towards the ground. Real quick, it lasted half a second. But it was so bright, and I didn't see it out of the corner of my eye. I saw it full on.
Wow.
And I did a double take, and I'm going, what did I just see? And I thought, well, maybe there was a meteorite coming in, a falling star, but that would be up in the sky. This was almost eye level with me. And
it was like as if it was on the ground then.
Yeah.
If about your height, or
about
maybe
8 feet off the ground, and the streak itself was about
not 8 foot tall.
No. But the streak itself was about 4 foot, but it did a little curving arc to the right, like not quite a full half circle, but a curving arc.
Yeah.
And it was this really bright, but not white. It was bright yellowish light. And it only lasted about half a second, but I saw it dead on. So
you don't think it's one of these weather anomalies? I can't say the word.
Well, like ball lightning or something. You know what? To be perfectly honest, there were a lot of thunderstorms this weekend, a lot of lightning coming through. At that time, all the storms had passed by. I had my radar app out and watching, and it was clear. So
yeah, but it wouldn't have been lightning or anything like that, because that's in the sky, isn't it?
Well, sometimes, but lightning strikes the ground. But it wasn't lightning. There was no thunder. It was just this brief flash. I can't explain it. It was really odd.
Oh, wow. If anybody knows what that is or has got any idea what that is, join us on the Paranormal UK Radio fan page and let us know.
That's on Facebook. of course.
On Facebook, yeah.
Yeah, it's our group page, so you can ask us questions, join in on the chat, suggest upcoming guests. So feel free to join us there, and you can converse with Irene and I, and sometimes listen to our bickering back and forth.
And have a laugh.
Yes, because I always win.
Have a laugh.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
You don't.
And on that note,
know you don't.
Why don't we go ahead and introduce our guest?
Mm-hmm.
Shall I do the honors?
Yes, please.
Okay. Our guest tonight, really excited to have her on. Our guest tonight has officially died, not once, not twice, but 3 times. She has clinically died and has had near-death experiences. She is also a psychic medium and a certified life coach. So we want to welcome Lori Niell to the program. How are you tonight, Lori?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, Lori.
Hello, Irene.
Hello.
Now, Lori, I had heard you speak, and I asked you to come on the radio show here. Now, you're also here in Colorado.
I am.
In the States with us. So you know what? I guess to get this ball rolling, let's start off at the beginning with this whole three times dying in near-death experiences, and then we'll ask some questions along the way.
Sounds good. Well, for me, it did all start when I was 5 years old, and I was going in to have ear surgery. I am deaf in my right ear, at least 90%. And being military dependent, it wasn't going to cost a lot to go and have that checked out. And they said, we actually need to go into her ear surgically and see if something's wrong. So they set this surgery up. There was a nurse on the floor that did not document that she gave me Demerol and Valium, which is what they give kids preoperatively to make them drowsy before they go down and actually get put under for surgery. When I got to the OR, which was 3 flights lower in this building than where I started out, the nurse there looked at my chart and said, she hasn't had her pre-op shot yet, so I need to give them to her. And the shots upstairs had been given 1 in each butt cheek, and then the shots that she gave me in the OR went 1 in each upper arm. So before I even got into the surgical suite, I was already overdosed on Demerol and Valium. Once they put me under, I immediately went into a cardiac arrest. And the staff were confused because they didn't understand why a reasonably healthy little girl, who they were just checking her hearing, why I coded like that. And in that experience, I just stayed in the hospital setting. As soon as you're out of body, just like many of us NDEers try to explain, you are hovering somewhat above the scene, the physical scene that you're part of. And being so young, at first, I just thought I was getting to watch my surgery. But at one point, it dawned on me, wait a minute, I'm above my own body. I can hear everything that everybody in this room is thinking. And the alarm on the EKG machine that, was telling them that I was flatlining was just a constant and irritating buzz, which I could clearly hear because I wanted them to turn it off. But in that case, I did stay kind of in that hospital setting. I realized what it was like to be out of body. I knew that everybody in the room was perplexed. I could feel and hear each of their thoughts, kind of like from their perspective. And the minute that I thought about my mother, who was waiting in the waiting room for me after the surgery, I thought, my mom is going to be so mad at these people. And as soon as I thought of her, I was literally hovering in the waiting room on her right shoulder. And while I was trying to figure out how I could get her attention and let her know that something bad had happened and that I'd been overdosed, somebody did come out to tell her what was happening. And I did see the look on her face when they said, she's had a cardiac arrest and we don't know why. At that point, they used the paddles on me where they went ahead and, did a shock to the chest to bring me back to. And in that case, they went ahead and canceled the surgery for 2 weeks. And then my very trusting parents handed me back to them. And 2 weeks later, when I had ear surgery, they discovered that I had too many of the tympanic membrane, which is the ear window, if you remember like ear physiology growing up in school. And they said to try to remove any of the extra windows would probably just take away the 10% of hearing that I did have in that ear. So they decided we have to leave that alone. And on a little side note, that's the side that I get my intuitive information, honestly, is my right ear. I tell people I hear from spirit world on the right side, and I hear from the physical world on my left side. So that was my first experience.
Well,
Laurie, how old were you then?
I was 5 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, that was very trusting.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you're right. That was very trusting of your parents to allow them to try again. When I think in this day and age, they'd be sued.
Well, they nobody ever admitted that I had been overdosed on the Demerol and Valium. In fact, the hospital, just as they do today, they were so busy trying to kind of cover their liability that they told my parents that I was allergic to anesthesia, which absolutely affected my future medical procedures because nobody would want to put me out again for quite a while because they believed that I was allergic to anesthesia. That's how they recorded it on the record. But as even a 5-year-old child, I was very aware of exactly what happened, and I was never worried that I had something wrong with my heart or, that I had died for any reason other than the fact that nurse gave me shots on the pediatric floor. She didn't record it. And when I went downstairs, the other nurse said, "Oh, it hasn't been done," and didn't believe a child when a child said, "I've already had my shots." Because she gave me a little speech about how most kids hate to get shots, but, honey, this is really necessary, as she put a shot in each upper arm.
I have one question before you continue on this. The out-of-body experience, and this is, I've talked to a few people who have had NDEs before. The one thing that I'm really curious about is when you were having the out-of-body experience at that time, how did it feel compared to when you're in your conscious in your body? Could you tell you were out of your body? Did the sensations feel the same? Did it look clearer?
Good questions. At first, I thought that maybe, looking at your surgery from out of body was just what it was like to be under anesthesia and have surgery. Once I recognized something was wrong, because that flat line, I had seen a TV show when I was growing up in the early 1970s, because this was 1971, and it was called Emergency, and it was about two paramedics.
I love that show.
And yes, I love it too. And that's where I learned what a flat line on the EKG meant. So that's why I even understood that I was supposedly dead or dying, was because I could see the flat line. And then that's when I realized, wait a minute, I'm watching everything from above my body, but my perspective was still that of a 5-year-old little girl. And I did even perceive that I had a body until I was trying to get my mother's attention in the waiting room, and I put my hand on her shoulder, and she wasn't flinching, and I could, that's when I realized I perceive a body, but I don't have one because my physical hand isn't there to, get her attention.
Wow. That's incredible. Now, and you also saw over your body, so you were floating at one point,
right,
not at ground level. So
you're usually, when people first die, they usually are right above their own physical body. At one point, when they start to recognize that they're loose, if you will, they often end up in one of the corners, because it's like a helium balloon. It's just going to naturally feel like it's floating upward. And that's why we often, say that heaven or the other side is up. In reality, it's just a different dimension, you see. So it's not really up, down, or whatever. But yeah, at first you definitely sense that you are above the physical reality a little bit. And but you do still perceive, like if you look down at yourself, you still perceive your body until you choose to try to use it for something physical, like moving an object or, jostling somebody's arm for attention. It doesn't work.
See,
when you came, sorry, Mark.
Go ahead.
When you came round after all this happened, Laurie, were you as a little girl? Were you frightened?
Not at all. And I was being raised Baptist at the time. Death didn't scare me because the Baptists, believe that you'll go to heaven if you've been saved or baptized. And ironically, I had been saved right before this incident. And at my church, they actually said, "We think she's too young." And then they sat me down and interviewed me to see if I really understood what I was doing when I was taking God into my heart and getting baptized in the Baptist tradition. So in that case, I wasn't afraid of death at all. And later, I told my physician what he was thinking while he was, scurrying around and trying to save me. Before they managed to get the paddle out to shock me, he tried using CPR. So he bent down and he was doing the breaths into my mouth. And again, in 1971, we didn't have the little inserts that you put between the mouths if we did CPR today. So I said to him, and my mom is at this follow-up appointment with me, I said, Mom, you know how you told me to watch adults who try to get inappropriate with me? And she's like, yes. I said, he gave me a movie star kiss during my surgery. And he's like, what? And I said, you bent down and had your mouth on mine for a little bit of time. And I'm like, that I think was maybe not appropriate. And he looked at my mom and said, I gave her CPR. I put my mouth over hers to put breaths in before they brought the equipment that we could shock her chest with. And at that point, too, I said, and your pin fell out of your pocket, because he had a scrub, shirt on, and it had one breast pocket, and he had a cross pin that fell out when he bent over to put those breaths in me. And that's when this physician was like, oh, my gosh, how do you know that? And I tried to tell him. I saw everything, but he hadn't heard a story like that before, and he thought I was a very imaginative little girl.
I bet he's told a few since, though.
I bet. I hope, because that was 71.
How long were you, how long was your heart stopped?
In that case, it was probably only a minute to a minute and a half. I mean, as far as what happened in the physical, it was very fast. My experience, though, trying to get a hold of my mom, listening to what everybody was thinking, I thought that it lasted for at least 30 minutes. But in reality, I was in an OR in a hospital where they had everything available. They just, at first, they weren't pulling that equipment up because they were just perplexed. They're like, she's a healthy little girl. We did a physical on her prior. We have no idea why she just went completely out as soon as we put her under anesthesia. And the reasoning was because I was overdosed, but they didn't think I had more than just the 2 shots I was supposed to have. So they decided I was very sensitive to the narcotics, and that's why I went out. And again, they labeled this as just a allergy to general anesthesia, which is not true. I do not have that.
Lovely.
So there was no inquiry into it then?
None, because my parents were very young. They were 22 and 24 when I was born, so they're still young. And my dad was active duty military, and the way that works is you really kind of don't question, the health care. You expect that you're getting the best there is, and you believe that, and that is really what they felt. Now, this actually happened at a civilian hospital because they didn't have a way to do this kind of surgery on kids at the base that we lived at. So I was actually, farmed out to a civilian hospital for that surgery.
So does your parents believe you now that you were overdosed?
Oh, they do. But it took many years for them to have a full acceptance, because it did make me very different. The second near-death experience actually made me start touting and saying things that are basically against their religion to this day, because it's not their experience. Yeah.
Well, you expect some, you can understand somebody having 1, but 3.
Especially when they're all unrelated and they're all human error, which is part of the reason that I went into nursing, is I truly understood how easy it is just to get busy with your day and accidentally kill someone. So I wanted to go into nursing and, not only be one that really paid attention, but also help my coworkers understand the gravity of what we're doing when we're there on a shift at the hospital, which I did for 30 years. I was in nursing throughout all spectrums of nursing from 1983 to 2013. So,
I see.
And
that first one was all down to a simple mistake because somebody wasn't concentrating really on what they were doing.
Right. And in each near-death experience, scenario, or when you hear stories, I divide them into 2 types. One is where you're just out of body, but you stay in the setting where your body is.
Yeah.
And then the bigger deal, and the stories that often are more compelling, are the ones where the person actually goes through the tunnel and starts communicating with something on the other side.
Okay.
And that definitely was what happened in number 2.
Well, why don't you go ahead and tell us about that one?
Okay. Number 2, I was 7 years old, soon to be 8. So it was in October, and I would be turning 8 in December, the end of December of that year. And so now we're in the year 1972. I had a school physical, and on the dip for the urinalysis, they thought that there was blood in the urine. So they said, we need to find out why a little girl this age would have blood in her urine, because I was a kindergartner, or maybe a first grader. I'm sorry, I was in first grade by that time, even though I was young. And they decided to do a kidney biopsy. I was at a teaching hospital for the Air Force at Lackland Air Force Base. It was called Wilford Hall Hospital. And one doctor was teaching another physician how to do a kidney biopsy. And as the student was advancing the needle for the biopsy, he accidentally pushed the button that would put the knife out there to get the specimen. And he cut the blood supply to my liver, the arterial blood supply. Now, the reason that I'm awake and aware of what's happening is because I was, written down as allergic to anesthesia. So they gave me a local anesthetic that put out basically my whole midsection, the feeling.
Right.
But I was able to watch this procedure on ultrasound.
So
and while I was watching it, I asked the guy, what's all that ink spreading across the screen? Because you're watching it on a TV screen, and this is early ultrasound technology. Somebody grabs my little teddy bear and tries to start distracting me, and you can see that the doctors are just like, oh, crap. I mean, they're even saying words that are bigger than that. They just don't know what to do. And so they distract me, but again, it turns out that they had accidentally cut the arterial blood supply to the liver.
Oh, no.
And they went ahead and went on in, got their kidney biopsy, took that, and then as they were prepping me to go home with my mom, because this was supposed to be an outpatient procedure, they said, she needs to go home and be on bed rest for 2 days. And my mom said, that is not what you guys said when we were signing up for this. What happened? And they're like, no, everything's fine. Again, hospital personnel are often tempted to cover their own liability.
Damn.
So they said,
you're certainly not giving me any faith in modern medicine. I'm telling you right now.
And this, again, it's the 70s. We have more things in place. But I think what I'm trying to let everybody understand is that your health care is good as the individual humans that you're getting that care from and what kind of day they're having.
Well, let me ask you this. They got the biopsy, but did they stop the arterial bleeding?
You can't just say vascular or arterial. You can't sew it because you can't cut it off.
So you have internal bleeding, and they send you home.
Correct. But because of the way an artery works, it did try to repair itself pretty quickly. I had extreme bruising, that they didn't expect because of the blood pooling under there. But the artery itself did try to, it clots, forms a clot until it can heal. And but I went home, and we had a house in Texas that had a door that led to a balcony off my second floor room. I went out the balcony door, climbed down a tree, and played with my friends when my mom thought that she had tucked me up safely in bed.
So you were being naughty.
Right, because I didn't really feel bad, and I think that's what's important, is that even though I was in a serious situation, it didn't make me nauseated or feel sick, or, I felt like, why can't I just go out and do what I want to do? Well, the next morning, I actually had a little friend spend the night, and she was older than me. She was 8 or 9. And when we woke up the next morning, she had spent the night with me, and we woke up in a bed full of blood. And she looked at me and said, I have no idea. She said, maybe you started your period, but you better go talk to your mom about this. She just went home. She was so mortified. And so I went to my mom, and I woke her up, and I said, Mom, Diane says that maybe I started my period because we got blood everywhere. And my mom took one look at me and said, honey, you're too young for that, and that's not what's going on. And she jumped up, and she put me in her car, and we drove 100 to 120 miles an hour down a straight Texas highway for her to take me to the hospital. I don't know why it didn't dawn on her to call for an ambulance. She just wanted to take me back to the people that she knew did the kidney biopsy. Because she's like, they'll know what's going on. And I don't want to try to explain it to an ambulance attendant. So We get to the hospital. I'm bleeding profusely. It is coming out vaginally, so they're just like, we don't understand what's happening. It was actually coming out my urethra. So that would be the orifice that your urine comes out of.
Right, coming through the bladder
so
because of the kidney.
Just to get the physiology straight here, yep. So it's coming out, yes, from the kidney area and that kind of thing. They're very concerned. They don't know why I could be bleeding this hard. Of course, there's 2 doctors that know exactly why. And they start replacing me with blood. They start giving me blood as soon as they type and cross-match me. Now, back in 1972, we didn't test it for anything else other than does it match. I got blood that had hepatitis B in one of those bags.
Oh, no.
And that's my second near-death experience, was dying of hepatitis B in a hospital setting in an isolation room because we didn't have liver transplants yet in 1972.
Holy crap.
You can see why I grew up to be a nurse. I just wanted to be able to know what the heck was going on and not let anybody make a human error on my kids.
Well, especially two years after. You're 7 years old, for crying out
loud. Right. Well, and you know what's kind of interesting at the end of the day is that there were times where I would look up and say, hey, why me? 3 times I've been clinically dead. That's hard on the body. And my own soul answers that very clearly every time. Your body is custom made for your work in this lifetime. She apologizes for nothing. And I only call her a she because I'm a she in this lifetime. You know, soul is without gender. But so they weren't really coincidental. My soul built these in so that I could do the work that I do now and the work that I did when I was in nursing. Because I did bring a little something extra to that job.
Well, yeah, and we're definitely going to get into that. But so they put you in isolation, and you died of hepatitis B.
I did, from that blood transfusion. And in that case, this is the only near-death experience where I actually did go through the tunnel, ended up in a construct, okay, and I call it that because the reason that everybody's near-death experience sounds a little different is because our soul is the one that writes it. Our soul is the one that says, this is what it's going to look like. Here's where we're going to be. Here's who's going to come in and talk to us. And in my case, when I was 7, as soon as I was out of body, I wanted out because it was nauseating. It was painful in my abdomen. I had swelling of the liver to where I would walk around and say, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a baby, and make the nurses cry because I did appear pregnant. My liver was distended, like you'll see with people with cirrhosis or something like that. The skin, my skin was yellow. The whites of my eyes were yellow. And I just felt
all that
horrible.
The hepatitis, yes.
Yes, that's what hepatitis is, exactly. So as soon as I was able to get out of body, in this case, there was no flitting around the hospital. My mom was in the isolation room with me. And I felt bad for the experience she was having because she was told that I was likely not going to make it that night. And my dad and my brother were being flown in from California. My dad was at an Olympic wrestling camp because that year he was an Olympic wrestler on the USA team. And he had my brother with him because my mom was trying to stay with me at the hospital while I had my procedures and everything that was happening. She never left me there alone. And so she's in the hospital room at my bedside, and I'm above it. And this time I'm not going to try to communicate with her. I know that there's no hope. I'm heading up through the tunnel, which was immediately apparent to me. So as soon as you see that, it's just like a natural thing to be like, that's where I'm supposed to go. And you do. And when I walked out of that tunnel, there was a man walking up to me, and he did have a burlap robe and a rope for a belt, and he looked like he stepped right out of my children's Bible. And I looked at him, though, and I said, are you Jesus? Because he didn't look like the depictions of Jesus. And he looked extremely entertained in his blue eyes. And he's like, no, I'm not. He's busy. And he sat down and he looked at me like eye to eye, and he said, I greet children and animals who have no one to greet them. And I said, why don't I have somebody to greet me? He said, do you know your grandma's mother? I said, well, no, she died way before I was born. He said, exactly. And he proceeds to say to me, you do this every time, kind of with an impatient tone. And I look at him and I'm like, I think you're confused. I died of hepatitis B from a blood transfusion by these people who made a mistake. I was playing victim. you see.
Uh-huh.
And it turned out that this was St. Francis, who the Baptists don't talk much about, at least not at that young age. It didn't even get covered in Vacation Bible School. Just that St. Francis is indeed the one who greets children and animals who have no one to greet them. And he said, you do it every time. And he said, and even though you died of hepatitis that they gave you, he's like, if your soul weren't on board for that, it could have never happened. He's like, why are you doing this? And the more he confronted that, the more I started to realize that I was in that soul state, that I wasn't just a 7-year-old little girl. I started to remember everybody I had ever been or even will be. And I looked at him and I just said, I just don't like it down there. And he's like, you have nice family, you have very nice parents, you have a sweet older brother, you're privileged because my dad was an officer in the military, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. He was trying to point out how good I had it. And I was just like, yeah, but the Baptists are teaching that, you know, if you're not really good, you can go to hell. And I said, clearly, I'm in heaven right now. Am I right? And he indicated I was. So I said, I'm going to cut my losses and I'm going to stay with you. And
Smart thinking.
like,
That's what I would have done.
Yeah, it's really, really where I was coming from. And at one point, he even put me in my mom's perspective, and she was doing Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's bargaining like nobody's tomorrow. She was definitely on the bargaining piece with God. I will do this, this, and that if you will not take my daughter now, or at least let Wayne, my dad, and my brother get here first, because she didn't want to be experiencing this with me alone. And when he pulled me out of her perspective, he's like, now how do you feel? And I did have compassion. I truly did. I felt bad that she felt so bad. But I looked at him and I said, she'll get over it. And
typical
so he
kid,
said,
this is, isn't it?
You know, it's true. I mean, I really was just being so honest and coming from my truth. And so he said, well, and he got up. And I should mention that the whole time that we're, you know, as soon as I walked out of the tunnel and saw this guy, I am in what I would consider the ideal outdoor setting. There's mountains. There's trees of all kinds. There's lush green, and there were 2 nice smooth rocks for us to sit on and have our talk that we were talking. And my mom thinks that I might have been clinically dead 3, maybe 4 minutes. My experience in this near-death experience was like at least 3 years of talking to St. Francis and getting everything I could think to ask answered. So when I had first woke up from this near-death experience, I said to her, how old am I? And she's like, you're brain damaged. Oh, my gosh, you weren't breathing for a little while. And I said, wait, just tell me how old I am. And she said, well, Lori, you're still 7. You'll be 8 in 2 months. And that's when I realized, oh, my gosh, there's no time on the other side because I did not have a 3-minute experience over there. I had a 3-year experience.
Lori,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what did it feel like if this was St. Francis? What sort of feelings did you get from him? Kindness, gentleness?
Very much kindness. And
love?
what was funny, very much love. And, I use this depiction, and some people laugh at this, but the picture of the Santa Claus on the Coca-Cola cans at Christmas time?
Yes.
With the laughing blue eyes?
Yes.
Doesn't we
Very
have them?
well depicted. Yeah, you can see the laughter in those blue eyes. That was very much how St. Francis was coming across. And at one point in this near-death experience, while I'm talking to him, he's trying to remind me that I'm a soul, that I'm not just Lori Bachman, that was my maiden name. And at one point in this experience, he waved his arm in the field near where we were sitting, and all of a sudden, there were a bunch of little kids, like babies, toddlers, and 3 adults. And he said, who are these people? And at first I looked at him like, how would I know? But he said, look at them, please. So I looked at each one individually. And as I really focused on each of those people, again, mostly children, babies, toddlers, very young, under 4 years of age, I realized those are my past lives. And he said, what's the common denominator here? And I said, they're all very young. He said, there's 3 adults. These are the 3 times that you've made it to adulthood. Most of the time you take your first out and your first opportunity. There's the baby who died of bubonic plague when she was 2 months old. There's there's Crazy Horse's daughter who died at 2 weeks old. You see, you see these people and who they were. And he looked at me and he said, you need to stay in the physical long enough and have a long enough experience to learn what you were planning to learn in that physical existence. And I heard him, and I understood what he meant by that. But at first, when he showed me those people, and I realized they were my past lives, I put my hands on my hips and I said, you're clearly mixed up. Where's Jesus? I'm Baptist. We don't believe in reincarnation. Kind of like I just landed in the wrong department, you know? And then he laughed and he said, well, I was Catholic at one time, and they don't believe in reincarnation either, but that doesn't change the fact here. And I'm confronting that you usually leave your lifetimes before you've even grown up.
I like the fact
right.
that how he admonished you in the beginning, like, oh, God, you do this every time.
Absolutely. Just with tone, and a look on his face like, here we are again.
St. Francis is giving you some tude.
Which, again, of course, it was very perplexing to me. As I looked at the adults, I did see a female, a girl who was French, and she died by being burned at a stake when she was 18 or 19 years old. I saw a male Plains Indian that I thought was at least 82. Turns out he was 52 when he died by having a rock smashed on his head by somebody who was angry with him. And then there was my most recent past life, and she was a New Yorker in New York City, and her name, I actually got her name, and that was Karen Ann Logan. And believe it or not, even with that generic name and all the databases that we have, I can find no record of a Karen Ann Logan in the city of New York at the time frames that I know that she lived there.
Interesting.
Wow. Do you know something? I've got a statue of St. Francis at the top of my stairs. I'm going to be looking at him different now.
Oh,
when
I
go
have
up
one
there
sitting right
tonight.
here on my fireplace.
Yeah.
Funny. Yep.
He's
a beautiful man and a beautiful soul.
He's going to be looking at you with the surly attitude, like, Irene,
Right.
you're naughty.
It's about time you come over, girl.
Well, exactly. As I was going to say, at least since he only greets children and animals with no one to greet them, then Irene's probably already out of the woods in terms of him being frustrated about that. But
Yeah.
No, knowing Irene, she's going to get God himself coming in, and he's going, we need to talk.
Well, see, and that does come in. The whole time that you're in the near-death experience, there's always this pulsing light in the background. And back to kind of getting to the point with St. Francis where he gives me the choice, because, again, this is another hallmark of a near-death experience, the choice to turn around or not. And then sometimes people are told by their own guidance right off the bat, it's not your time. They don't get the choice.
Yeah.
But when I was given the choice and I said, she'll get over it, he said, okay. And then he started walking. He stood up. He started walking into the light. As we were walking, there was a sense of like our feet elevating above the ground that I had perceived we'd been standing on. And so I am behind him. I'm going to follow him. And as he's walking into the light, I'm behind him. And then all of a sudden he stops abruptly, which kind of made my energy walk through his. And that's, again, in that experience where I realized we don't have physical bodies because I just went through his energy. Now I'm standing in front of him and looking up at him because I was still coming from the height that I was as a 7-year-old girl, and he was the height that he must have been as St. Francis. And as I'm looking up into his face, I can see that he's communicating with the light. He has kind of a look on his face like he's entertained. And he looked down at me and he said, so much for free will, but he said it with like a giggle and a twinkle in his eye. And I woke up in the hospital room, and my stomach was no longer distended, my skin was no longer yellow, and the whites of my eyes were white. And my mom, being Baptist, was like, I've got the miracle that I've been sitting here praying and bargaining God for all night. When the hospital staff came in the next morning, they actually brought the gurney to get my body. Wow. And when they walked in and saw my mom and I talking normally, and my skin not looking like it was, and just I wasn't nauseated, and I had a completely different affect than what they had known the night before. They were like, who came in here and gave her some kind of treatment last night? And it was a teaching hospital, so there would be maybe people who had something to experiment with. But my mom and I assured them that nobody came in the hospital room all night. It was just the two of us. And they had a very hard time accepting hepatitis B being completely cleared when we had absolute lab values that showed that I had hepatitis B. and that I had, the normal progression of dying from hepatitis B until that moment.
Wow.
And after a team of specialists came in and cleared me, because you can't just go home if you're diagnosed with hepatitis. That's called a communicable disease, and they don't let you loose in the community until they know you won't give other people hepatitis. Interestingly, in my nurse career, I was forced to have the hepatitis immunizations numerous times because they never take. I never hold the antibody. And I finally just said I refuse to keep getting the immunization series because I have some reassurance on the other side that hepatitis will not be an issue for me ever again. And I believe them.
Wow. A couple of questions. Well, first of all, old St. Francis pulled a fast one.
Right. Well, I really think the light did. I don't think it was up to him. I truly believe that the light was just like, you know what, we gave her the choice. She picked the wrong choice. And, from my own soul's perspective, they knew that they wanted me to come down and complete my path. So really, I would joke that more the light made that decision, and St. Francis was just the messenger in that case when he looked down and said, so much for free will, and then sent me back in.
That's still pretty funny, though. It's like,
it is.
It's like,
it is.
Nah, you're going back.
Right. Well, honestly, even though we laugh about it now, there was a little part of me that did feel rejected. Like, what did I do wrong? Like, why couldn't I stay up there? Because you guys did give me a choice, and then you didn't let me, which probably led to my third near-death experience, which was when I was an adult. I had already become a nurse. I became a nurse when I was 18 years and 4 months old because I started nursing school as a senior in high school. It was a vocational program. So you go that first year as a senior in high school and you get your nurse assisting. Then you go that second year after high school and you get an associate's degree. So I was very young when I became a nurse. And I was 20 years old when I had a ruptured ectopic pregnancy, rupture on Christmas Eve. Bad day for that because I went to a local community hospital that was it was a satellite clinic of our larger hospital system. And they didn't have an ultrasound tech at the hospital that day because of the holiday. They had them at the main hospital, but not this one. So I laid in the emergency room with this ruptured ectopic pregnancy, which is where the embryo of the baby ruptures your fallopian tube instead of going all the way into the uterus, to nest where a baby's going to grow. So instead, when the baby grew in the fallopian tube, it gets to a point where it's big enough to actually rupture that tube. And then you have the baby and the fluids from the fallopian tube freestanding within your abdomen, which is excruciatingly painful. So I went in there, collapsing, young, pregnant girl, had one child who was 11 months old, and said, I have excruciating pain. Well, there's a lot of pregnant ladies who present with that, and usually it's not too serious. So they called the ultrasound tech. She put on her makeup and curled her hair. Then she came to the hospital, and once they finally put the ultrasound wand over me, they saw that there was just so much blood that they couldn't see anything else going on in there. And the two physicians that were fighting over which one had to do my case because, call had ended at 7:30. I made my call at 7 a.m. when my physician said report to the hospital, got there at 7:30. So these two physicians were arguing over which one had to go in and do my surgery because it was Christmas Eve, and they had plans. They both ended up going in, and it took both of them to save my life and to, mop up all the blood and get that taken care of. And in that situation, just like in my first one, I pretty much stayed in the hospital setting. Whoever I thought about, I was with. The people I thought about actually were there because they were the people that mattered the most to me. And so really those two incidences were just very benign, feeling what it's like to be out of body, but no tunnel opened up in the first and third experiences at all. I didn't even get that far, if you will.
And so what brought you out of it? How long were you out this time?
In that case, what brought me back in was when they took me into I followed them while they took me into the surgical suite. I watched them do the work when they cut me open and started using a C-sponge to clear out all that blood. And as soon as I saw that they were going to be able to repair it, then I got back in. And it's hard to explain because it's not really your human choice. It's your soul's choice. And my soul just let me, sit right there with that energy, that sum of everybody I've ever been and will be, and they appear to be somebody different. What's interesting about this experience is as soon as I got out of body, I was looking for the tunnel after that second near-death experience. And this beautiful, I thought, angel with long, blonde, curly hair and perfect skin and the perfect body, if I could order what I'd like right now for this lifetime, was right there. And she wanted to indicate boredom to me. So she was actually filing her fingernails. Has anybody watched Carol Burnett shows? And there was a character on that called Mrs. Wiggins.
Yes,
Mrs.
I
Wiggins
did.
would always look bored by filing her fingernail, So this was it was a message to me, like nothing big is happening here. No big deal. And I'm like, where's the tunnel? And she's like, you're not going anywhere. And I said, why not? And she said, and then as soon as I said, why not?
Funny.
It is a testament to my soul's humor. It is. As soon as I said, why not, I was hovering the waiting room again above my mom, but this time she's holding my 11-month-old son. She's like, you're not going anywhere. We got a kid. And I should have known when she said, we've got a kid. But you know how some people do that. They talk in plural. Like, how are we today? I thought, well, she's just doing that. No, that was me. That was my higher self. That was me and my perfection. But I was only 20 years old when I had this happen, and she looked to be about 30. So because she was older than me, and because she looked perfect, I certainly didn't think that that was me. But that's what your soul looks like, is you and your perfection in that particular lifetime. And she did. She reassured me that even though they were late, and even though I was indeed dead again, that I wasn't going anywhere and that I would be saved. And I asked her, why? Why then? Why is this happening? And she said, it solidifies our communication. And I said, I don't understand. She said, you've known since you were almost 8 that you're a messenger for the other side. She goes, this will help clarify that. And indeed, she was right. After that third near-death experience, it's very hard for me to block out souls on the other side. There are times where I'm out in public and I feel, I can feel people on the other side asking me to walk up and tell their person down here something for them. I try to do it when I can. It causes all kinds of issues when you walk up to somebody at the local grocery store and say, hey, your husband has a message for you. And then they look at you and go, my husband is dead. Who are you? But I do really struggle with trying to block out the other side and just, quote, live a normal life, which is why I did leave nursing. I do sometimes free channel, meaning that if I end up in conversation somewhere and something on the other side feels strongly that a message needs to get through, I did give up discernment in that second near-death experience, and sometimes I just become a radio for whoever it is on the other side. The caveat is they have to be coming from the highest perspective, and there has to be a reason to inconvenience my life by suddenly walking up to somebody and telling them something about their life that I shouldn't know. But there are many of us. And when I was younger, I feared that I was the only one until I started finding other people who had near-death experiences or other people who, for whatever reason, can get out of body. And those of us who have had these experiences are often the ones that are called psychics or mediums. And I have indeed had those abilities since the second near-death experience when I was 8.
Wow.
Yeah, it's well, isn't it?
Well, it opens up a lot of questions for me from that perspective, because the whole process of death and dying and going to the other side, of course, everybody wonders what it's really like if you haven't gone through that experience consciously in this lifetime. I should add as an addendum.
Exactly. Thank you. Good addition.
And I've had close family members recently pass away, so I wonder from their perspective what they went through. Now, you mentioned the tunnel, which is something that's been around for a very long time. They've mentioned this tunnel that you go down. Could you tell what the tunnel consisted of? Did it like...
I could not at the time, but I've done research on that since, and I will tell you that this is very interesting. When I was in I believe this was my early 20s, I actually did, mushrooms, which is a psychedelic, right? It's a God-given plant, of course, but it does have psychedelic or psychoactive components to cause what some people back then would have called tripping, right?
Yeah, often found in Amsterdam.
Right. And, and again, I want to say, just in defense of anything that is God-made, if it causes something like that, then it's okay. What I caution people against are the man-made synthetic things that will make you, quote, trip. But I took the mushrooms, and this is going to be the only time I do it because for me, rather uncomfortable experience. But at one point, I remember going and looking in a mirror, and I was looking into my eyes, and the pupils of my eyes, the pupils were highly dilated. You could hardly see any color in my eye. And as soon as I was looking into the pupils, I could feel the tunnel opening up. And my own soul said, "Why are you messing with this? Now you're at the tunnel. You should probably not go through this tunnel." And I was like, "What?" And she said, "The tunnel, even if you were a blind person in your physical life, the tunnel actually comes from your consciousness and originates in your pupils. And that's why your pupils are the window of the soul. So when we see the tunnel, our consciousness is exiting out of our pupil."
That's an interesting perspective.
And I'm not saying that anybody else agrees with it or anything, because this is information I got from the other side. But it is interesting to me how other people who experiment with San Pedro or any of the natural substances, ayahuasca, that do open up brain capacity, and usually, of course, they're going to dilate your pupils in that process. A lot of them realize the tunnel is somehow connected to our eyes, and that's somehow what we are perceiving. And then those two tunnels, though, blend into one when you're standing there. And then it's just, I can't explain how it's natural to just go there. You don't like, should I go in there? And I have heard of some souls who actually feared the tunnel. And generally, that's going to be somebody who has some dogma, some religion that tells them that they might be going to hell. And so they're just trying not to go anywhere. And then that's what, to me, creates a discarnate, which is what, a lot of the paranormal stuff is actually getting in touch with an incarnate or a discarnate. And a discarnate is somebody who died, didn't go through the tunnel, hasn't gone upstairs and had transition with God. They're literally wandering around in the physical space that they used to exist within, wondering why everybody's ignoring them, and just not, and I've never understood why, the tunnel doesn't open up for them later. I know that some people do work where they actually help those discarnates go through the tunnel so that they're no longer, trapped in this repetitive situation that whatever happened in their past life. And certainly that sense of being ignored is really painful for a discarnate, who's still trying to communicate to their family members, and the family members can't hear them, they're not seeing them, and they don't understand why.
Well, you would think in a situation like that, and I think you've already partially answered the reason why earlier, regarding time and perception, because you would think that these people would get the hint after the first couple times of trying to reach somebody.
Exactly.
And why they've been trapped in a house for like 20 years. And, they still don't know that they've died. It's like, you think you would have gotten a hint by now, but...
Or you know what? Trapped in that physical space because, houses get torn down and rebuilt, or, over time everything is gone and then something else comes in its place. So the rare times that somebody said, come and work with me, I think I have a ghost here. Usually it's not that. It's something that person is actually manifesting, and they're supposed to be learning something from it. But the rare times that there is an actual discarnate, it seems as simple as saying, "Are you sick of being ignored?" "Yes." "Do you want to go and speak to God about all of this?" "Yes." Well, and then their soul finally shows them the tunnel, and then they just go. We have some famous ghosts here in Colorado. Is it called the Stanley Hotel up in Estes Park?
Yep, Stanley Hotel.
Yeah, I knew you guys would know right off the bat. They go over and over the ghost there that has a very repetitive thing. She comes down the stairs. She says the same thing to every guest. And that's called an imprint. So that energy was so strong that people still witness it and see it. But there's not actually a ghost, quote unquote, or some soul trapped within that. That was just such a strong experience when she was in that lifetime and she was having that moment that everybody keeps seeing and reliving, that she left an imprint.
Well,
But you can't... Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
I was just going to say, you can't interact with that ghost. You know what I mean? Like, hello, who are you? What are you doing here? She's just replaying a moment in time that she had at that hotel.
Which ghost is this? Because I want to stay at the Stanley Hotel when I come over.
Oh, gosh. Well, when you get there, they have lots of lore about her, and I don't remember her name, but it is a female who is dressed in the time period from like the late 1800s, early 1900s, and she's walking down a staircase. When she encounters people, she says the same thing, something like hello or nice day, you know, something typical, and then walks on. Some people never realize that they didn't actually see a person who was dressed in period costume, and other people recognize right off that they can sort of see through her, and therefore they saw a ghost. And that's what I think is interesting is it's up to your soul how much you're going to perceive spirits and ghosts. And there are many people, as you know, who say, I don't see any of that stuff. And that's because, for whatever reason, their soul feels like they're not ready for that. But anybody can get ready for that if they want to, and can get to that space where they can perceive the spirit world. You don't have to have a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience. There's ways, you know, to increase that possibility.
As a paranormal investigator myself, I need to have a chat with my higher self, say, you know what, after 17 years, I think I'm ready.
You know what? You truly are. You absolutely are, and that's true. So then we would try to discover what other blocks may be there. And, because I agree, when you're open and you're saying, hey, it's not going to scare me, it's not going to make my heart stop. I'll tell you this little story. I don't usually see apparitions. All of my work, when I'm doing psychic work, everything I see and all my visions are in my third eye. You know, of course, it's not like playing out on the wall in front of me or whatever. But one time, I was living with my parents after a divorce, and every morning I would go out and run 4.5 miles. There was a certain part of this run where I was still on the road that I live on, where I was afraid to turn my head. I just started to realize I am scared when I go by this one property. And one day my guidance said, today I want you to look at that property. I don't want you to keep your head turned. You know, I want you to face whatever this is. So I was like, okay, because I would run early in the morning and it was still pretty dark. And so this day I look to my right as I'm running across near this property, and I saw what looked like a lady I thought was from the olden times, because she had on a long white dress and it had layers of lace and her hair was up in a bun. And I remember telling myself she looks like Marie Callender, because that was like how Marie Callender was being depicted in the commercials at the time. And I thought that she had waved. I thought she had lifted her hand up to wave at me. And she was not on the ground. She was literally floating about 3 feet above the ground. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I've never seen an apparition before. What does it mean? And I had some theories over the years. Then fast forward to a time where my parents bought that property for me, and they built a house on it. And they let my son and I, who my son at that time was 4 years old, move into this property. Then we have a Christmas Eve where I go up to my parents' house. We're having a family gathering. My dad's parents are in from out of town. They were from Oklahoma. And as soon as I walked into the house, my knees buckled, and I looked at my dad and I said, you're a heart patient, and you're going to die when you go to Mount Everest if you don't get care. And my dad looked at me and he's like, Lori, we have had it with your strange side. Don't scare my parents. And I couldn't stop it. I was almost hysterical. I needed my dad to understand, you're a heart patient and you're going to die because he was going to Mount Everest for something called the Earth Cleanup Day. It was where they actually pick up all the litter that humans leave behind. And they sent me home because they said I wouldn't settle down and stop talking about it. And when I came home, I was really sad that I had again acted out, didn't mainstream well with my family, so therefore I didn't get to spend Christmas Eve with them. And then my guidance came to me, and at that time there was a spirit named Audrey, who I knew when she was alive, who was one of my teachers. And she said, Lori, listen to me. Get your wedding dress out right now and put it on. I was like, why? And she said, you must do what I say. Well, it's a long story, but people like me, we often do what they say because it's just easier. So I did. Put on my wedding dress. My hair was up in a bun because I worked as a nurse at a military installation, and they required me to put my long hair in a bun. As I'm walking around my house with my wedding dress on, realizing that I feel pretty silly, I thought I better go and close the blinds in the front bedroom so that other people don't see me walking around in my house in a wedding dress, because I live in the country, and so, when people drive by, if you have your lights on, it's like a fishbowl. So I went up to the window, reached my hand up to twist the blinds shut, full body goosebumps and some laughter from the other side. And I said, "What's happening?" And they said, "Remember the ghost that looked like Marie Callender?" I said, "Yeah." They go, "That was you today. We were just trying to show you that this is where you were going to live someday." And they said, "The reason that she was floating 3 feet off the ground is that the foundation of your home is 3 feet off the ground." She wasn't waving. I was closing the blinds. I was twisting the wand that closes the blinds in the front. But again, just like when I saw myself in my third near-death experience, I did not recognize that as being me when I first saw her, because it was an older version of me, for starters. And I had already known what my wedding dress looked like, but that still just didn't, I guess I was distant enough that all I saw was what I thought was an old-time, long dress. I was trying to put her in a time period like the 1800s. And it wasn't. It was that I saw a vision of the future. And I asked them later, what if I wouldn't have put on my wedding dress? What if I just said no? And they said, well, then you could not have had the vision that you had years ago, because this is how that works. If you don't actually manifest it, then how can you, as somebody, as an intuitive, how could you have seen it in the future if we didn't create it?
Wow. What's really fascinating about that story, and well, actually, there's a couple of things. Even with your last out-of-body experience, some of this seems to fall in line with a lot of the work that Irene and I have been doing with our group, Supernatural Research. Can't talk today. Supernatural Research Institute, SRI. Mm-hmm. So, with you seeing that vision of yourself, could it be a possible, what we think of as a time slip?
Yes, that's, what's funny is I'm actually getting right now that you guys could probably explain better to me what occurred there, because this isn't really my specialty. But that's exactly what it was. In other words, it had to have happened in the future for me to have been able to see it in the past, for somebody like me to see something like that.
Right.
The other thing is had somebody else been running with me that morning, they would not have seen her, you see.
Yeah.
I don't believe that apparition would have been visible for somebody else. However, it would have been interesting to know.
Well, and a lot of this, as you pointed out during your near-death experiences, time is relative. And
it is.
Lunchtime doubly so. Right. When people are in that state, and like we mentioned about somebody being a discarnate spirit in a house for 20 years not knowing, it doesn't feel like 20 years to them.
No, if you ask them how long, because I've done, rarely do I work with discarnates because it just doesn't come up much, but you say, how long have you been here? And they'll turn to you and say, 5 minutes, 500 years. It depends on which perspective I take.
Mm-hmm. And even science now is beginning to accept the idea that all time is happening at once. And it's only our perception of it. When we're here on this earth plane, our brains interpret time as linear. One moment passes from the next to the next. And when you were over and you saw that other lifetime, and during your second near-death experience, and you saw all your not only past lifetimes, but future lifetimes. Well, how would you see a future lifetime if it hasn't happened yet? But that's only because from our perspective, it hasn't happened yet.
Exactly, and I will interject there, too, is that if everything weren't happening all at once on some level, where does somebody who is called a psychic get their information from? Because that's what we are tapping into, is the all.
Exactly. The other thing you mentioned in your last near-death experience, and this is something that Irene and I have really been looking into, is the when you saw the angel, per se, and you realized it was your own higher self.
Right.
And an aspect of your higher self. And we've, in a lot of the research we've been doing, we found that in so many cases when people see interact with somebody else or another spirit, or they're hearing voices or whatnot, a lot of that information, they may think, oh, it's God or my guides are whispering to me and whatnot. But in most cases, it might just actually be that higher self communicating. People just don't recognize it.
It absolutely is. I'll even throw out something controversial because they're telling me it really is time for this information. But of course, we like to protect our reputation and not say things too upsetting. Mm-hmm. But I just will interject this. When you have a fundamentalist Christian who is praying to Jesus, and, there's times where they're like, look, I don't believe in psychics like you, Lori, who can talk to the other side, but sometimes I talk to Jesus and Jesus talks back.
Yep. That's their higher
I used
self
to
answering.
think, oh, you're talking to some fictional thing that you're making up, until it finally dawned on me, or I finally, got the understanding that our soul is our connection to the God source and everything that ever was. And every individual soul or light, because, a soul is made up of light and energy, is the best way to describe it here in the physical. When you combine everybody's individual souls and lights into one, that's the light, or God. And that's why God can never be an individual or a he or a she. It is the combination of all of us. Mm-hmm. It is the all. And that's where oneness, right, comes into play as well.
Well, it makes me wonder also when you met, and it was supposedly St. Francis.
Right.
Was it St. Francis, or was it an aspect of your higher self?
In this case, yeah, that's a good question, because you're right. My soul could have been taking on the guise of St. Francis to have this entire conversation. In this case, apparently, I do have some history with the soul that was St. Francis. So it was indeed a soul outside of me that I was conversing with. And the reason that I want to believe that the light set that up was because I do quickly, when I'm in a near-death experience situation or out of body, I will quickly recognize myself. If I think I'm having a discussion with me, myself, and I am not going to be as respectful of that as I am when something outside of me comes and I know it's not me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
St. Francis
that makes
was
sense.
An authority for me. Even though it wasn't Jesus. Yeah.
That definitely makes sense, Laurie. Mm-hmm. So do you channel your higher self very often?
Only for me, In other words, my higher self really only has interesting things to say about me and my life. When I do my work, and the reason that my business is like Your Soul Has the Answers is because when somebody's getting advice about their own life, I don't recommend that they listen to their deceased parents or grandparents or loved ones. I recommend that they listen to their soul. Now, they can find out what the other people have to say, or the other souls, once they're not incarnates anymore. But it's still best when those don't necessarily agree that you follow your soul's advice. So I channel my soul for my purposes, right, for like what I need to do in my life. And when I'm working with other people, I try hard to keep my soul out of it because she's very opinionated, and I have their soul speaking to the situation. Because, again, that can be two different perspectives.
Okay. When you've channeled your soul, do you ever come out with something that you could never have possibly imagined you'd know? Some highly intellectual, highly intelligent information?
Yes.
Highly intelligent.
Yes,
highly intelligent.
Yes. And you know what, again, a lot of that, okay, so think about the poor person who was the first one trying to explain down here that the earth wasn't flat. And you know how much guff they got for that, because everybody said if it's not flat, then if it's round, we should fall off somewhere, right? Like somewhere we get to the edge and, So when somebody like me gets these, what I call revelations, right, of amazing things, it's very hard to bring that to the physical because most of the time that causes ridicule until many years later when it starts to become a possible truth, and then people accept it. Does that make sense? I'll give you an example. Cell phones, right? When I was very young, I saw these in the future all the time. To me, I was thinking, that's very Jetsons-like, right? I watched a cartoon called The Jetsons. And I'm like, that's never going to happen. That's not really going to be. And I think it's because I didn't really want to think that we could all have to carry a phone around and be available 24/7. I just didn't accept it. But there were times that I tried to tell my little friends, you know what? Someday we're all going to carry phones, and some of them won't be any bigger than like a credit card, and there won't be a cord or anything. And they were just like, that's ridiculous, Lori. And it did cause ridicule. Now, of course, many years later, cell phones came into being. Some of those people remembered what I said, and they'd call me and go, wow, I guess you did know. You see, but when we come up with a revelation, it's very hard, because if nobody else down here is ready to even think about that possibility or believe in that probability, then that's where we start getting treated differently, or, you know, told that we're not okay, that we believe these things that are just ridiculous, until they actually come into being. So yes, I have indeed. And cell phones would be one example of something that I was very aware of way before there was actually the technology out there to create that. Same with the internet. You know, what is this thing that everybody's connected to and knows within 30 seconds of an incident happening somewhere? And that is the internet and social media. Very hard for a little girl to wrap her head around what that is or how that works, but just knows that it exists because, you know, if I'm looking into the future, I'm seeing, the people interacting with this type of equipment.
Fascinating.
Yeah, fascinating. Sorry about the dog snoring, by the way.
It's not that bad.
I can't hear it, so I wonder if the listeners will be able to hear it as well.
They will.
I think so.
I heard that one big snore. It's like,
well, then that'll just add a homey touch to it, I think.
Yep. Well, Gertie is the official mascot of Paranormal UK Radio, so.
That is awesome.
So she has to be.
I mean, animal energy is so important, and, you know, people often ask me, you know, you pick up on what people are thinking or what they want to say, you know, do you have that with animals as well? I definitely do, and I thought that everybody did. You know, when I was growing up, I didn't realize that when I was 8 years old that I, you know, kind of became different after that near-death experience. I thought that everybody could read each other's minds to some degree. You know, I thought everybody knew what an animal was thinking or saying, even though they don't speak our language. And it wasn't until probably my mid-20s that I started to realize that, no, I'm operating very differently than say the average person. I don't want to say the normal person, right? Because I'm normal. It's just not how everybody is set yet at this point. But anything that I do or anybody like me does is available to everybody on the human spectrum.
Well, our Gertie is certainly human in many, many ways, and she makes herself heard every time there's a show.
That's good. That's great.
Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned like when you have these, you hear the voices, whether it's your higher self or these other things, and they're telling you things and giving you information. You generally listen to that?
I do. I mean, there's a time where you have to sort of filter all that out and just, I jokingly say, live your physical life. You know what I mean?
Right.
And literally put a filter on and not have that going on. Generally, I keep my filters up, right, in general space, because, again, you're not going to mainstream well with society if you stay tuned in all the time, because then you're going to be at the grocery store and you're going to get something about somebody, and you're going to be dying to address that. And you can't do that. You can't walk up to strangers and just start saying, hey, you know. Most people, I would say, actually don't appreciate that if they're not expecting it.
No.
Even if it's a gift.
What about information for yourself? For yourself, or about, you know, whether it's something currently going on in your life or for your future, or just some tidbit of information that just like, oh, wow, I'd never considered that before.
Right. It's constant. And then the difference is that when you're reading your own stuff, right, or you're getting your own advice from your higher self, once in a while your human side is actually pulling in what you want to believe. For example, it's hard to read my own children. My son, he's now 32, but when he was 15, he had what I thought was a freckle on his eye. You see, I thought, well, this is no big deal. You know, he's got a little freckle there. And then it started getting bigger, so I took him to an eye doctor. And the eye doctor looked at me and said, wait a minute, are you a nurse? And I said, yes. And he said, well, then why did you let this go so long? And I said, what, the freckle on his eye? And he said, this could be cancer. This is not a freckle. And I was mortified because I spent my life helping other people with their medical stuff. And here, I didn't realize my own son had a possible cancer growing in his eye. And my own guidance said, this is why you can't work on your own, Lori, because you so much don't want anything to be wrong with your kids that you won't pick it up even if it's there, because I'm in, it's like a denial thing, right? And so I don't really try. I mean, I do get information on my friends and family, and indeed, by the way, I was correct about my father. The end of that long story was when he got back in touch with me after they made me come home because I was acting out in front of my grandparents and upsetting them, saying that my dad had a heart problem. And he looked like a stud at that time. He was running the 100-mile marathon up in Leadville where you go up and down 214ers. So they're like, hey, there's nothing wrong with your dad, Lori. We made a bet. He said, I'll go to the cardiologist of your choosing, and then if I'm okay, you're going to go to the psychiatrist of my choosing.
Oh.
I picked a cardiologist for him because I was a nurse, and I knew some good ones. And he went, and he basically presented like this. My daughter thinks she's psychic, and she says I have a heart problem. I have 0 symptoms. My blood pressure is good. My resting pulse is 42. And the guy's like, wow, you're a stud. He took his blood pressure. Yep, that's good. And then they talked Olympics. He didn't really test my dad. So my dad comes to me with his clean bill of health for the heart, and he's like, I don't really know any psychiatrists. So he's like, you go ahead and pick one, but I want to see, what his evaluation of you is. So I picked one, and I went to the psychiatrist, and I said, well, my name's Lori, and I hear voices, so I'm just here to get a prescription for lithium or something like that. And he looked at me, and he said, it's really interesting. He said, most bipolar or schizophrenic people don't walk in and just say, hey, I hear voices, so I'm here to get the prescription. He's like, why don't you tell me what these voices have to say? And I said, well, they always want to be helpful. They always want to point out something that somebody may need to do for their health or for their relationship. He says, do they ever ask you to harm anybody? And I'm like, oh, far from. No, this is all about doing good. I've never had a voice tell me to harm anybody, no. And he says, well, what do your voices tell you about me? And I thought, wait a minute, are we shifting this to a reading? Okay, hang on. Because, I was playing patient, right? I was the psychiatry patient. And I said, can I touch you? He's sitting at a desk. I'm at a chair on the other side of his desk. So I lean over and I put my hands on his wrist. And I looked at him and I said, after about a minute pause, I said, well, the girl you're dating is only like 2 years older than your own daughter, and if your wife finds out, you are in so much trouble. And he snatched his hand away from me, and he's like, that's what your voice has said. And I said, no, that's what your voice said. I just am a radio. And he's like, well, I'm not sure. He said, I'm not going to write a prescription here, but I do have somebody else I could refer you to. And he just didn't really want to address that. And so I went to my dad and I told him what happened there, and I didn't have a little letter saying that I was okay. And then I actually ran into the physician that I had referred my dad to out at a hospital that I worked at, and he was a contract doctor out there. We were at a military medical facility. And I walked up to him and I said, when my dad dies on Everest, I'm going to sue you 12 ways to Sunday. I said, I'm usually not a litigation type of girl, but you're going to be in trouble because you didn't even check him. And he called my dad, and he said that I verbally assaulted him at the hospital. So my dad said, Lori, you're continuing to not only go into these crazy spaces where you think you know what's wrong with somebody, but now you're even attacking a physician and you're a nurse. He's like, this is a problem. So then he went to the Olympic Training Center and had somebody do a stress test on him, a stress treadmill test. And that's where they realized there is something very wrong with him. He's been in heart failure for the last 15 years, but he has top-notch medical care, and that's why he's still here. The man that I see today at 76 is the man that I actually was looking at, my gosh, that was at least 30 years ago that this whole incident occurred. And so, I was seeing the future. I saw the heart patient. Because I'm a nurse, I know what a heart patient looks like versus whatever other kind of patient. And he did find out that, indeed, he needed to be on something called digoxin before he went to altitudes over 14,000, because that's what we have here in Colorado. At Mount Everest, he was going to go to an altitude of 22,000 feet. At around 16,000 feet, his lungs would have filled with fluid, and he would have died because of his heart rhythm problem. And that's when my parents started believing in me. And also the more that I was correct about the crazy things I said, as time went by, things happened that I had predicted, or the premonitions that I had shared with them. And at this point, they have mixed feelings about it because they still, as Baptists, do not believe in reincarnation, but they do believe that I connect into something in my work and that it helps people, and they actually refer people to me. But they tell them, what she says is not necessarily the view of her parents.
They have a disclaimer.
So you saved his life.
I did. And you know, it's hard because with the medical interventions that we have now, there's a part of me that wants that to last forever. And he's not on that page anymore. You know, we are getting closer to that day. And some people say to me, I don't see why you're so broken up about like losing your dad or your mom, because you can talk to dead people. And I'm like, you know what? I can. That's true. But I still lose that physical person. The longer somebody's dead, the more they're more the soul state, not just say your mom and dad. But the thing I'm going to miss the most is watching them interact with my grandkids. They're great mom and great dad to my grandkids because they're the great grandparents, you see. So I'll still lose a great deal when they cross over. But yes, I will be able to communicate with their souls easily, and I'm grateful for that, very.
Laurie, can I ask you what your take on aliens are?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. The last talk that I did in Denver was actually comparing the near-death experience with the out-of-body experience. And the lady that I was talking with had actually had an out-of-body experience where she was indeed communicating with aliens. Okay. So here's what I was told in my near-death experience, when the second one, when I was just 7. Okay, but again, when you're out of body, you're not really a 7-year-old. So we talked about things way over a 7-year-old's head.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came up was, is there such a thing as an alien, and will I ever personally encounter one? They said there is indeed aliens because there are more than one physical world that is inhabited. I said, okay. They showed me that. They were numerous. I mean, I can only say that there were more than I could have counted. So we know, and, you know, we are starting to learn that there is more. In fact, wasn't it like a few months ago that NASA came out with the number of planets that they believed could actually sustain life?
There's a formula that's been out there for many years in the astronomy community where they figure out roughly through mathematics how many civilizations there could be out there, which I always thought they were lowballing it myself.
You know why they're lowballing it? Because they're looking at what's in our known universe, right? From this physical perspective of Earth, versus there's parts of what I want to say that exist, if you will, that we can never access from the Earth plane. So anything that we can see with our astronomy equipment or that sort of thing, there are more in this universe that are inhabited, yes. And then beyond this physical universe, there are others that are inhabited. So, and then my next question was, do they all look like humans? No, they do not. Every planet that has a physical life form on it has something that adapted to that planet. So we look like humans because this is what adapted to this planet, right?
Right. What I wanted to ask, sorry.
What now? Go ahead.
What I wanted to ask is, now this is going to be a bit difficult for me to put this into my own words. When somebody has an out-of-body experience or a near-death experience, sugar, I can't put this into my own words. Do you think that maybe it's like an abduction, and they become like an abductee, that they're taken by their soul or whatever is taken by aliens for research, and they allow you to see what you see so that it keeps you calm in a way?
Right.
Before you're actually put back into your body.
My belief...
That is the most Dumbo way of saying it. I know what I'm talking about, but I cannot get the words.
I'm going to try to rephrase it to see if I'm phrasing it correctly. Can your soul be abducted? Just simply, is that a question? Like, can your soul get abducted?
Yeah, and during near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences, it's the easy way for them to actually do it.
So in other words...
Because you're actually... Yeah.
So in other words, Mark, what you're saying is that these ideas of near-death experiences is like a mask for like an abduction experience?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, yes. I have a strong answer for that. And that is that one thing that we need to understand is that your soul is actually the puppeteer and your physical body is the puppet. There is nobody in charge of your physical body besides your soul, ever. Can others take over? Only if your
not
soul
actually take
wants
over,
you to learn
but...
something. You know what I mean? Or even like, can others even manipulate that in a way against your soul's will? No.
So
will your soul allow you to see an alien? Yes.
So let's say if somebody is abducted and they're having experiences, you know, whether medical experiences or some kind of experience like that, that if it's happening, it's their soul has given that permission?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That is absolutely my strong belief. And I always sound so solid, and some people really can't stand my know-it-all attitude. But when I am channeling, they act like, yes, we know, there's no question. You know what I mean? So anytime that I sound that way, I tell people, pardon me for sounding like there's not even any give on this. Because, of course, there is in the human condition. But, yeah, your soul is very much in charge of anything that occurs with your physical, and nothing can happen to your physical body, nor can anything be experienced by your physical body that your soul did not create and allow.
So even, and I think where Irene was going with this, and Irene, you can clarify, is that somebody who's having what seems to be a near-death experience, but might actually be something more involving an alien abduction experience. So
not necessarily alien abduction. It could be us from the future that's doing it, you know, another dimension or something like that.
But what Lori is also saying, that if whatever is happening from a soul level, we've already agreed to it.
Exactly. That's why when somebody feels like they were victimized by an alien abduction, I try to work with them on that and explain that whatever this experience was, their soul did allow this to happen. And I'm certainly not one that tells them it did not occur, because I think that we humans need to get better at looking at other humans who tell us a story and say, that's not my experience, and not say, there's no such thing, you're full of crap, right? Because, I mean, I tell my near-death experience stories, and a lot of people say, oh, no, that's not true, you're crazy. And I look at them and I say, if you've never been clinically dead, how do you know? Right? So I can't say that I've ever personally in this lifetime been abducted by an alien, but I work with people who have, and their souls tell me that it did indeed occur, and may tell me what occurred in that situation. But one thing that is important in not just my work, but in most work for people who work with souls, is to explain to people why whatever happened in their lifetime happened, and why they're not a victim, even if they feel very victimized.
So there's no mistakes, or there is no, like what happened to you with your medical screw-ups that they did on you, almost killed you a couple of times. And or like, let's say we have a loved one who just has a heart attack and dies. And, you know, you're scratching your head like where they were at their life, what's happened with them. But you're saying that is all part of the pre-plan?
It is. It is absolutely pre-planned. Your birth and your death are determined prior to your life. Even if you die horrifically, even if you die in an accident, those two things are solid, and they were planned. Now, then somebody says, but wait a minute, you know, Lori, like you died, but then you managed to come back. So, you know, but in another realm, you could have like died from that, right? And it's like, yes, but this is all planned by our souls before we come in. And even things like who you have your children with, that is not random. We as human beings believe that we've got free will. We get to pick our partner. We get to decide whether we're going to have children with them or not. But in all honesty, on some level, that stuff was pre-planned with the souls before we ever came in. And even, for example, like in this lifetime, I had a situation where I had an employer who didn't like me at all. And she accused me of heinous crimes that took 2 years to clear me of. And of course I thought, now that woman, she victimized me. It was front page news. Then it went viral. And, I was just like, how could she do this to me? When I look at it from the perspective now, because this was in 2011, I look back and realize that because of that soul accusing me of a crime, I got to stay home. I did choose to voluntarily leave nursing to do the work I do today, which I was very afraid to do this work. But now that I'm doing it, I see the value in it, and I actually love it. But most importantly, even though my grandson had already been born, I went back to my job and said, I'm coming back to spend 40 hours a week with you guys. I'm going to come back and be a nurse here. And that's when they accused me of the crime, which of course led to the end of that job while everything was being investigated. And I would have missed out on the relationship that I have with my grandson, who is so important to me because I know who this soul is. My grandson is the same soul that was once my spouse. My younger son's father died when he was 13 from alcoholism. We were very close, even after he crossed over, of course, in the 7 years that he was in the in-between. And in that 7 years, he would explain to me that he was going to come back and be his own. He told me he was going to be our granddaughter. And that was very interesting to me because I believed that the soul could tell you what they were going to be next. Once that baby was being formed within my son's, we call her the baby mama. They never got married, but my grandson's mother, actually a little boy formed. And so my son and his girlfriend at the time came by the clinic I worked at, and they said, hey, your granddaughter has a penis on the ultrasound. And I was like, what? Because he had told me, he's going to be a granddaughter. And I even went out and bought little Bronco cheerleader outfit, for a 12-month-old. And so it turns out that a soul can say they want to be a male or a female in their next existence, but really all they get to do is pick the person or persons that are going to be their parent. And then it is nature that takes over once a fetus is forming.
So there is no choice in gender because
there's not. That's why somebody like Caitlyn Jenner can exist, because you can have a strong idea of what you want to be when you're born, mm-hmm. and wake up disappointed, right? And realize, wait, this isn't the gender I was hoping for. And that is what leads to transgender and that whole situation, yeah. Right,
but there is also a balancing in that with a karmic balancing where, living certain lifetimes, if you're living too many lifetimes as a male, then part of that balance is you have to come back and live as a female. So you're experiencing
Absolutely.
both those sides. So you're
Perfect,
saying
Mark.
that,
Yep.
but you're saying that there's no decision made there, that it's random
Right.
by nature. It doesn't
It
sound
feels
right.
random to the soul because, of course, they have a preference most of the time when they end up picking the parent. Sometimes they have an idea of which gender that parent might do better with. But once that soul gets into that fetus, and is like lodged in so that when the baby's born, it's going to be animated. Because, see, a human is not animated, nor is anything with life animated without a soul. So once that soul is in that body, then yes, you could say that that's a higher power, or you could just say that maybe nature takes its own course. I'm not sure. I just know of many incidences where a soul tells me I'm going to come back as, and they say little boy or little girl, and sometimes they are wrong. And, luckily it's only a 50-50 proposition here, thank goodness, but, that's where it comes from, is that the soul usually does have a preference, and it is in my belief to some degree, but this is an individual belief, is that I think that most of the time we should, like you said, Mark, if we're male or female, that is meant to be, and we need to figure out kind of how to adjust to that. But for those who feel so strongly, as Bruce Jenner must have, that they're not in the right situation, then I say, live and let live, or more power to them. But I personally, if I were in that boat, and I would say that people who have near-death experiences actually sometimes recognize that we don't really relate to gender at all, because we were in that space where it didn't matter, right? And, of course, our culture and our society has all kinds of assignments for what boys do and what girls do. And even though we're getting better, we still have that, don't you think, to some degree?
We do, but there's also, it's not always 50-50, because let's face it, there are hermaphrodites.
Exactly. True.
Well, that's 50-50, isn't it?
Well, it's
It is.
50-50 for that person.
Mark, thank you for bringing that up. One of my past lives, when I was in that second near-death experience, one of these children had been born with both sets of genitals, both female and male. And that child, and this was like in the 1800s, so this was, it's been happening since the beginning of time, but we didn't have good communication back then, so everybody who it happened to thought that they may have been the only one that it ever occurred to. But in that lifetime, the parents were very uncomfortable with the situation, and the physician said, look, it'd be easier, since this little individual's got both, to go ahead and cut off the penis and leave the female genitals alone. Well, that little child related more to being a little boy. So when they woke up from the surgery and realized that they were missing the penis, he actually went outside and jumped off of a cliff for a fatal fall. That was it. Just because, the parents had accidentally picked the wrong. If somebody was going to make this little person be one or the other, which I think they thought they wanted to be both, but it was like, at least ask them which one they think they relate more towards, because nobody asked this little 4-5-year-old kid. In that lifetime, that little child had it until that age, and then they decided to do something about it, I guess because school was coming up, and it was time to just, assign a gender here. And they just picked the one that was easiest surgically. They didn't even ask the little child, what do you think you are? Are you more a little boy or more a little girl? Because if he had been put into a corner, he would have said, actually, I relate more to like being a daddy when I grow up and being a boy. And they had made him a girl. And that was not acceptable to that little individual. And they ended it, essentially.
And of course, the whole idea of transgenderism is a huge hot topic in the last, few days.
Yeah.
And the
military, right?
Yeah, over here it is. That's the military ban, and people are all up in arms about it. And there are. I've known some transgendered people, and you mentioned Caitlyn Jenner. There's also the young girl has her own show. I Am Jazz Jennings.
Right.
And she from birth always came out as female in everything that her actions and does. She played with dolls, she dresses. Right. Her parents luckily recognized that at an early age and let her go with it, instead of trying to force her into that, nope, you're born a boy, you're going to be a boy, and which causes so much psychological damage to those types of kids.
To everybody, not just the kid, but to the parents as well, Does that make sense? The parents are very hurt, too, trying to force somebody or someone in a box that they don't belong in. It creates horrible relationship situations, yeah.
Or then with, for religious reasons, too.
Right.
It just throws it. So, people like her are lucky in that they are allowed to progress more naturally along that line. You look at her, she's a girl, 100%. She may not have the surgery yet, but
they did have a transgendered man speaking on the TV about being kicked out of the military, the possibility of, and I guarantee there is nothing about that individual's energy that would even tell somebody like me that they started out birth as a little girl. Mm-hmm. Nothing. They're 100% masculine, had the whole conversion surgery.
Yeah.
So, my just for fun, my thought on that is truly that I think once that transition is complete, then they should be able to serve. The only reason that it's hard to allow them to serve while they're going through a transition like that comes into the amount of taxes that would have to be raised so that those surgeries could be paid for through that avenue, through the military, where we provide their health care 100%.
Right. Plus the hormone therapy, psychological therapy while they're going through transition. So, and I understand all that, but I agree with you too. Once the transition's complete, power to them, let them serve.
Right. Because you know what God is? Down the other side, it is very much live and let live. Allow the others to have their experience.
Unless you're in the military where it's kill or be killed. Sorry, Ed.
Right.
The opposite is being in the military, kill or be killed.
Exactly.
Well, looking at things from a soul perspective, and let's talk a little bit about free will. Okay.
Okay.
Is there really any free will in the physical, Or if you're really talking about free will, it's actually in the spiritual before you come here, because it's at that time where you're making all the decisions for a lifetime before you come here. But then when you come here, you have all this stuff happen. You go, oh my God, why me? And you know, you think you're going to be making choices and choosing, but are you really? Or are you just following the pre-programming of before you were born?
I really believe that for the most part, we are following the pre-programming from before we were born. There is a reason why we need to perceive that we have free will. And you know, anytime that we have this discussion, somebody will stand up, give an example in their life where they had a crossroads, they got to make the choice, you know, either I'm going to marry this person or I'm not, you know, that kind of thing. And you know, and they believe very strongly that they controlled their outcome. Okay, and so to some degree, that is how we feel. But I do believe that the process of free will is something of a delusion, because I like what you were saying, Mark, when you were trying to explain that yes, we have free will, but that free will is being exercised at the soul level, not the human level. And the way we know that is all the things that occur in our human existence that we would never allow or write if it could truly be up to us. Right?
Yeah, I have more than a few stupid experiences I would not have done.
Right. I mean, how many times have most of us looked up and said, even though I believe that my soul is the puppeteer and I'm the puppet, I cannot believe that you wrote this for me. You know, and for example, when I was accused of heinous crimes, which involved supposedly I breached a medical database here in Colorado Springs, not just
you weren't, were you?
They said 2,500 people. And
you were accused of crime. That.
They sent letters to 2,500 people and said, Ms. Lori Niell breached your medical information. And this was not the fact. But, and because I was a city nurse here in Colorado Springs, the city actually did a press release on these accusations. They didn't even tell me that they thought that I did this. I first heard about it when our newspaper called and said, what is your response to the city's press release about you today? And I went, what? And they said, there was a press release that you breached 2,500 people's medical records. And I went, I have no idea.
I hope you proved yourself innocent.
I have. I actually was guilty of printing my dad's sleep study for him after HIPAA came into play. And I also had a boyfriend that asked me to look up his previous cholesterol results and compare it to that current year so that I could tell him whether he was doing better or worse on his cholesterol medication. And that, too, was after HIPAA came into play. Both patients, my dad and this boyfriend, gave me permission to look them up. But under HIPAA, you don't have permission to do that unless the physician gives you that permission. So on those two counts, I was guilty. But on the 2,498 other counts, I was cleared, yes. But my story here actually goes back to that I at one point looked up to God and said, you know what, God? I've been working for you since I was 8 years old. And this is what I get? That they're going to say I did this and now it's out there in the public arena and all these people think I victimized them? I said, I'll tell you what, I'll see you in a few minutes. I'm coming up there without my body. I'm done. And luckily, I didn't have a real plan for how I was going to commit suicide, but I was threatening it and I meant it. And that's when the light came down to me and said, all right, listen, let me show you something. They took me to that past life. The reason I'm so aware of who Karen Ann Logan was, this New Yorker who died on October 30th, 1960, on this 59th Street bridge, she had accused an uncle of sexually abusing her, and it was false. But she had two sides of the family. Her mom was Italian, and she had uncles on that side who were basically in the mafia or some sort of organized crime. And on the other side, her father was Jewish, and those relatives were actually in the legal system. They were attorneys. They, they worked with the legal world. Well, the attorneys, the mafia side, when one of the uncles from the legal side was running to become the district attorney in New York. And the mafia uncles did not want this man to become the DA. It was one thing if he was just an attorney, but he knew a lot about that side of the family. They're like, we cannot have him becoming a district attorney. when he's aware of some of our activities. So they hatched a plan. If we have Karen, that was my name in that lifetime, accuse this guy who's trying to become a DA of sexual abuse, it will probably derail his career. It works like a charm. He lost his marriage. He lost his ability to even practice law. And he lost basically his life and his reputation, even though he lived a lot longer after that. So after God showed me this, the moral of the story was that even though Lori didn't do anything in this lifetime to deserve being accused of breaching the medical database, my soul had indeed accused somebody of something they hadn't done in a previous lifetime.
So it's like karma. Yeah.
It was karmic, exactly. And so I looked at God and I said, okay, well, now that I've had to pay up, that lifetime is still ruined. As Lori, I believed that there was no recovering from that. And I said, I still want to die. And they showed me my grandkids. They showed me my future as Lori right now. And they said, you actually don't want this. And believe it or not, even though today it feels like the end of the world, when we have you leave nursing, there is something else out there for you, and you will still be able to make a living and support yourself. Because I am not married. I do have a boyfriend of 8 years, but he's not paying my bills. So I was very concerned that I was not going to be able to, ever have a livelihood again. But I do. And to this day, when somebody schedules with me and then later calls me, or when we get online for the reading and they say, gosh, I Googled you and I saw some really interesting stuff, I tell them the truth. I tell them what happened. That's basically the modern version.
You're not hiding any of it, are you?
Right. No, because what this was, you know what almost makes some of us really prove that we've paid our chops or whatever, is that that was the modern version of a witch hunt. And they did almost take me down or out, but instead I grew from it. And to this day, if somebody looks me up and they see that negative stuff on the internet, or they see, nurse claims psychic ability and that's why she was forced out of her job, that is a Huffington Post article that's still up there on the internet.
Yeah.
So when somebody
nothing ever goes off the internet.
No. And so when somebody confronts that, or say they just decide not to even work with me at all, they read that and they're like, oh my God, she's Madame Cleo, I'm not going to ever talk to her.
Do you know why they done this?
What?
Why did they do this to you? Why did they say that you...
Oh, because I was very strange and it was hard to work with me. And, once in a while, patients would come from the back office, and as they were checking out, making their follow-up appointment, they would tell my boss, a little nice Catholic lady, that I knew things about them that I shouldn't have known.
Yeah, but somebody must have had it in for you to...
They did. You know what? They just didn't feel like I belonged there. And, in all honesty, at the time, I vigorously disagreed with that. But it is actually true that when you go to a clinic to have, say, your work-related injury looked at, maybe the nurse should just take your blood pressure and hear what you are there for and then go get the doctor. This nurse would put the blood pressure cuff on and say a police officer who keeps getting re-injured on the job. I was actually, I took care of police and firefighters and they were injured on the job in my last nursing job. And say I put the blood pressure cuff on that police officer, and then I start telling him, if you would stop having that affair on your wife, you could keep your mind on your job, and then you wouldn't keep getting injured.
So in a way, you became dangerous.
Exactly, because you know what? Luckily, and this is what's special about the work, when it's individual to individual, one-on-one, I get away with it. It's when they go out and tell somebody else what happened, and somebody else tries to assign what really happened, that things get iffy. In this case, they didn't feel comfortable with me there. They didn't like what I did. And I was getting to a point in my life where I would free channel. Say you're just standing in the break room. Somebody walks in. Sometimes if I pick up something in somebody's life, that doesn't mean I have to address it. In fact, quite honestly, I'm generally going to choose not to, because that's not like the place and time. But because I gave up discernment in my 8-year near-death experience, once in a while, my consciousness says, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. And my body walks over and corners the person and says, I want to talk to you. And this is what we're going to talk about. And it can be nerve-wracking for somebody who has not run across somebody like me before.
Well, I learned not to do that a long, long time ago.
That's right. It's called discernment, right? And boundaries, right? Boundaries.
That's right. That's
yeah,
right.
well, I don't really always get that ability to respect others' boundaries, and I know that it sounds extremely egotistical to say that, a higher power is in charge of that for me. I just don't know how else to convey it, though.
I'm really sorry this happened to you.
Thank you. I've really overcome it, and that's why it's so easy for me to talk about. But I do like to address it because I feel like if I don't, that when somebody does find that, they're just like, wow, she did a 2-hour interview, and it never once came up that she got in trouble with the database.
Yeah, well,
but
you see, you addressing it shows to me that it's a load of bullshit.
Thank you. It truly was, but it led me where I need to be, and I think that's maybe the bigger.
You've got nothing to hide. You're
story.
addressing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Is also too that when we're in resistance. For example, I was told the last 5 years that I was in nursing by my own guidance. It's time to leave nursing and start doing this work full time. And I kept telling them, I tell you what, I'm going to do this as a side. It's my hobby, and I'm going to stay in nursing for the medical benefits, for the actual very regular paycheck, all of those things. And they kept saying, your fear that you can't make any money if you're not a nurse is not correct. And I will kind of tease them, though, upstairs and say, I don't have medical insurance, when you're working for yourself. That's really the only thing I miss about being employed by somebody else, is being on a big group medical plan.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm much better off than I was, because now I've created a space where I'm allowed to do what I do, because people contact me and say, will you do this with me? And then everything's good. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense.
Yes. So you, too, are very intuitive and able to read situations, aren't you, Irene?
You have no idea.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring you out of the closet if I did. I always call it the psychic closet, But anyway, I could really feel how much you're relating to me there, and I just want to tell you I thank you, because that warms my little heart, makes me feel better.
Oh, I think
See, I always tease her, because when she hears the voices, she just tells them to piss off.
Oh, you never know what you might be missing out on.
She can't be bothered.
No, for a few minutes.
I know. I've got full control on what I do. Absolutely full control. And
I'm jealous. That is cool, and I do believe you. Yes.
Yeah, and when I hear, this is why I asked you, I can't remember the question I asked you now. I've got this bloody pain in my arm, is hurting me so much. Whether you get really high intellectual stuff coming through.
I do. And one thing that has happened even is on rare occasions, there are times where I've spoken in languages that I have no idea. You know what I mean? I don't know the language. I know what I said.
Yeah, well, what I get through is far beyond my intelligence, and Mark could tell you that.
Right. In other words, here, let me ask you this. Have you ever just been trying to journal? Like, just write in a little diary, and then all of a sudden all this information starts coming in?
No, she makes me write it down for her.
I don't bother. Mark does it all, because if something starts coming, he always makes a note of everything.
Well, there have been a couple here. I'm going to out her. There have been a couple of times when we're talking on Skype, actually just typing back and forth, and suddenly the information coming through, I can realize, where the hell did she get this word?
In other words, it's not her usual vocabulary.
Yeah, and I figure out pretty quickly she's kind of like zoned out. Somebody else is coming through. And then when I tell her about it later, she gets so mad at them and said, I'm not going to let them come through again. Those sons of you-know-whats. And
you know what? That is so valuable, though, to have friends like you, Mark, who are recognizing that instead of just saying, no, everything that comes out of her mouth has got to be just from her perspective, and then on the other hand, I understand how she feels about, like, how dare them use me like that.
No, it's so highly intelligent that even, it is, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, because some of the conversations
your soul wouldn't let them in if they weren't coming up with something smart. You know what I'm saying? In other words, they wouldn't.
It's more than smart. What these come out with,
they come up with
beyond. It's
really
technology beyond what most even humans understand is what I'm getting.
One last quick question, because we're almost out of time, and that is, do you ever experience, like, if you're sleeping or even during the day, just something happens, you zone out, and you feel like you've just been downloaded with information?
Yes. Yes. Frequently. And sometimes I know where that, like, what sparked it, and other times I don't even know, like, why that came up at that time frame. You know what I mean? Yes. Yeah. And you know what's interesting is since the advent of computers, the word download is the best way to describe that.
It's the only way to describe it, really, isn't it, when you think
exactly.
of it?
It's a very fast transference of a vast amount of information that, you know, we didn't have to sit and read it for 30 minutes like you would if you were trying to read information or whatever. A download is an instant knowledge of something that you were shown on the other side. Yes, and it can be about anything.
Yep, there you go.
And, yeah, and, you know, it's funny because it's like, Irene, whatever your subject matter is, that's your soul job and it's your purpose, and don't resist it, because when you resist it, you start getting pain in weird spots of your body that might not be able to be correlated in any medical part. Exactly. You know, just the bottom line is that anytime we're in pain, we're in resistance of some sort. Always. That's kind of what pain is.
Yeah, but I have to resist it. Otherwise, people just would not understand me at all.
True.
So I try to be as human. I try to be as, well, I'm saying human. I try to be
as
me.
human as possible.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But then again, there's also me who understands, and you don't need to hide behind that on. So, you know, there you go.
See, that's because it hasn't been your experience. Why do she and I know that we do need to hide? Because we've suffered the fallout from the people that to this day we still should probably hide certain things from.
Well, I was just
they
saying,
can make our life miserable.
She doesn't have to hide it from me. You know, she can just
True.
let it come out because I'm too damn curious anyway. So,
right.
Anyway, we've actually run out of time.
Wow. Well, this was fun. I really enjoyed talking with you two.
Well, Lori, can you tell people where they can find you, and if you have your website where they can get in touch with you?
Sure. My website is yoursoulhastheanswers.com, and I always remind people that soul is SOUL, and that answer must be plural, answers, because your soul will always have more than one answer for you. And my book in the future is hopefully going to be out at the end of this year or early next year, excuse me, and that is called Undercover Angel, the story of a 3-time near-death experiencer.
Fantastic.
And, yes, my website is
Undercover Angel. Undercover Angel. That's a very good title.
Thank you.
It's very good.
And I'm not elevating myself, because I want everybody to understand that an angel, by most definitions, is simply somebody who communicates for the light or for God.
Great.
And there are many, many, many individuals, both living and on the other side, that do exactly that.
Wonderful. Well, Lori, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah,
all right. Thank you very
Lori.
much, both of you. I hope to talk to you both again.
And
you will. You will.
And Lori, don't go away. We'll talk to you right after this. But we want to thank to everybody for listening to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. You hear us Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time and Eastern Time. And it's also replayed Monday nights on Art Bell's Dark Matter Digital Network at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Plus, we have all the other places you can get our podcast, Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, and so many others. I'm not even going to remember them. So, if you have any, and also
we're all over the place.
And visit our Facebook page, Paranormal UK Radio Fans, to talk with Irene and I. Thanks a lot, everybody, and we'll catch you next week. Irene, have a good evening.
Yeah, and you, sweetie. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.